right, guys, welcome back to Of Stone and Clay. This is episode 120. Today we have an awesome guest. We had an extremely crisp dap when when we walked in. We're both wearing green hoodies and hats, and that's about the extent of my knowledge of you. But Shawn is he's kind of one step above a stranger. I think I met you once.
Yeah.
And I've listened to our podcast that you were on.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much for being here, dude.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I feel like I don't even know how to introduce you because I feel like you just have your hands on a lot of pies.
Yeah.
I feel like you're a pie guy. What do I know you do some coaching and some, you're on some boards and you're into leadership and you do a lot of traveling. What for you is like, not necessarily what you tell everyone, but what you kind of consider yourself like.
Yeah. That's interesting. My mission at this point right now, it's combining so much of my past and making it into exactly what I want it to be, which boiled down, it's literally helping people live their happiest and healthiest life. That's
Gotcha.
it. And that broken down further, I'm under contract for a wellness facility that I'm launching, which is essentially focused on three main parts, which is performance, recovery, and longevity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fitness center that also has a recovery center with the sauna and the cold plunge. Mm-hmm. It's also got it's based around group classes, so the social connection piece.
Okay. Yeah.
And all of it's all based on 8 pillars of mental and physical performance.
Okay.
So it's just the basics: sleep, exercise, diet, nutrition, spiritual grounding, social connections, and the growth mindset.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you're the perfect face of it because you look great.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. You don't want your wellness, instructor or the owner of the wellness facility to look like he doesn't dabble in wellness.
True. Very true.
That's awesome, man. So what has been, what's kind of gotten you passionate about that over the years?
It's in my background in the corporate world is leadership development, and I've loved that. And then I kind of just stumbled upon a guy named Jim Lair who did performance psychology, basically created the 1.0 version of what I'm doing right now. I'm literally creating a 2.0 neuroscience-based version of that. It's called the Human Performance Institute. It was acquired by Johnson & Johnson, became J&J's Human Performance Institute. But what I loved about this was a leadership training, so how to be a better leader. They'd run them through a 2.5-day leadership course, but in that course, they would test their blood work. And they would talk about spirituality. So they had their 4 pillars, which was mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional.
Okay.
And I love that in a big corporation like J&J, they were talking about the spiritual piece, for example, right? And they were talking about the importance of social connection and how that's important for your health. So anyway, I loved that idea because I am a wellness freak, and combining my background in leadership with total wellness and just how that impacts performance. That's kind of how I got into that.
Cool. And how long have you been doing like coaching?
Coaching has just been in the last several months.
Oh, cool. Same with me.
Yeah.
What do you, when you are doing one-on-one coaching, what's your sort of area of that you're, talking about the most?
It's those 8 pillars. I literally, it is going back to the basics, but my idea is getting them optimized in each of these 8 areas. Because if you're doing that, you are living your healthiest and happiest life.
Yeah.
So sleep affects everything, right? So that
are you a good sleeper?
I'm not a good sleeper, actually.
Yeah.
But if I follow my routine, I'm a great sleeper.
Okay.
And I have lots of thoughts on that. But and then social connection is a huge part of this. Relationships is a huge part of that. That's actually the 2 parts that I'm most excited about in terms of what I do is how exercise impacts your mental health.
Yeah.
So that's one huge topic area that I love. And then the other one is the power of social connection, how that impacts your health.
Yeah.
I've dug very deep into how social relationships impact your overall wellness, literally like even your physical wellness.
Yeah.
You've probably heard of Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad at BYU, who is the first person to study how lack of social connection impacts your physical health, and how those relationships and the importance of social connection literally for survival.
Yeah. Okay. Let me, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I always kind of say this sort of half jokingly, a little flippantly even, but I feel like I'm someone that is just never sick. Like I just have good luck, good health, good metabolism, good immune system, whatever.
Yeah.
But I also have always had lots of meaningful connections in my life and lots of friendships and different groups of friendships and different ways of connecting. And I've talked about it on the podcast a lot where the way I have my life set up, I feel like it's almost impossible for me to get deeply, deeply depressed because of the systems I have in place. And of course, I'm not impervious to situational depression and, really dark moments and periods, but I feel like, and I am naturally extroverted, so I love doing that. And when I am depressed, it's not in my nature to go be alone. I want to go be with people, but it almost feels like this safeguard I have that, yeah, I'm just constantly connected. I'm tethered to people. And so I don't know. I don't know the science behind it, but it feels like, I don't know. Do you feel like that's maybe part of why I'm so rarely sick?
Without question.
Really?
Without question. The research actually says that your social environment makes up 55% of your total wellness, your total health. So if you have that covered and like you are taking care of so much of the other things, that's why you could probably be, I mean, not arguing that you should, but more minimal on some of the other stuff because that's so strong for you.
Yeah.
So the science would support that.
Well,
100%.
I'll tell you right now, I don't have a great diet and my sleep's not great.
And yet you're still there. That shows you the power of social connection.
But I'm very active.
Yeah.
I play a lot of sports.
Yeah.
I lift weights.
Yeah.
Not very heavy ones, but I'll lift them up.
You look good.
Thanks. I like the baggies back in style. It's good for my frame. But yeah, it's just interesting because it's always kind of felt like pseudoscience. The whole just like mind over matter and positive thinking and stuff. But I'm kind of like, but if it works, it works.
Totally.
I don't care. If it's placebo, I don't care.
You know what's cool is it used to feel woo woo or pseudoscience, like you're saying, and now the science, the neuroscience, the social research, it's all caught up with it.
Yeah.
And it proves what you're saying. So it's kind of amazing.
Could you tell me a little bit of maybe scientifically why having connections helps your body stay healthy?
Yeah, good point. So you've also heard of, I want to, before I forget, dig into like not dig into it, but talk about blue zones. You've heard of that, right? Blue zones are the people who live the longest, healthiest lives, right?
Yeah,
and they're
the
like
Japanese.
pockets in Japan and a couple other places. And the reason is because they're familial connections. They're still living in multifamily units sometimes, right? They're all super connected to their family, and that's what's aiding their health. There's so much. In fact, on the science side, I'm not the deepest on the science side, but I dig into it quite a bit. But just recently, so one of the guys who I'm really close with is the director of neuroscience at Wharton. Super science. He used to be the director of neuroscience at Duke Medical Center, and now he's at Wharton. And he literally was just on Huberman's podcast, and he was talking about the idea of synchrony.
Yeah.
And what happens with the oxytocin that releases in the brain when you're able to connect with someone, and how that impacts, it impacts a lot of things. It impacts performance, impacts wellness, impacts all, obviously that impacts your mental health. And so that is at least part of, one of the things that I looked at most recently in terms of how that scientifically, having good social connection impacts your wellness. And Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad talks about how lack of social connection is the equivalent of smoking 12 to 15 cigarettes a day, right? Just because literally it, and you talk about people who are older and getting Alzheimer's and they're living alone.
Yeah.
They die so much more quickly because they don't have that connection. And connection, literally, the chemicals that creates in our body, that's what helps. So that helps physical and everything else. And then just mentally, when we're taken care of that way in social connection, it's just such a huge, all of our health is all intertwined, physical, mental, social, spiritual. So when one of those is really missing, that impacts everything else. So
do you feel like there's a difference between that connection if it's like romantic versus friend, familial? Like, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that they have really good relationships, but they have like 2 or 3 of them. Right. They just have their little tiny unit. Is there a difference between that and someone who's very social and has lots of different kinds of connections in different pockets?
Totally. the science and the research does talk about the quality of those relationships. So it's not just having relationships or being super social.
Yeah.
I mean, a person that comes to my mind, Robin Williams, and I don't know enough of his history to know, right?
Yeah.
But obviously incredibly social, knowing everybody, but still struggling mentally in some major ways, right? And there might have been other stuff going on there that I don't know about, but absolutely. Anyway, yeah.
Do you feel noticeably healthier when you're in a romantic relationship yourself? A healthy one?
Good question. So again, depends on the quality of that
Yeah, yeah.
romantic relationship. So
Let's say it's great.
right. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting how they can impact you. So let me kind of dissect those a little bit too. So the romantic side, again, the quality, you've heard this outside of just health, right? You've heard the idea that your romantic partner can either make you the happiest or they can make you the most angry or upset or miserable, right? So it has an impact. So the quality of that relationship is important. And yes, in my personal life, when the quality of the romantic relationship is really good, I'm feeling amazing.
Yeah.
But just as important, what I didn't realize, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but it's been 2 years ago now where I took a very intentional dating break.
Okay.
It's one of the best things I could possibly do for my health.
Yeah.
And I think for me personally, one of the reasons for that was I didn't realize how much I was expecting a romantic relationship to fulfill for me that I should be getting in other areas.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I took that intentional dating break and didn't think about women romantically in that sense at all. And it was liberating and incredible. I can go into that in a lot of detail. But I also used that time because I wasn't focused on that, on developing my other relationships with my bros, with dudes, going on some amazing guy trips. And truly, that was one of the times I was happiest I've ever been.
Yeah.
And it was because I was developing these other relationships. So both of them have a huge impact for sure. And they're both important, both the romantic and the more platonic relationships, whether with men or with women.
Right. Okay. I love that you were talking earlier about sort of your pillars of wellness that are important to you.
Yeah.
I, a couple of years ago came up with what for me are the pillars of dating.
Cool.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on them.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I kind of came up with this with my roommate. We're, similar age and just have had similar lives. And we're just talking about dating nonstop and relationships. And we're kind of like, what are the things that actually can help us see if a relationship is worth continuing or worth pursuing, or like you go on 2 or 3 dates and you're like, I don't know, she's great, she's cool, I don't know, are you going to see her again? Probably. Like, how can you kind of determine if they have what you want? And I think it starts with figuring out what you want and what's important to you. But we kind of decided, okay, here are 5 things that are probably a little bit universal, and it'll vary on, how important they are to each person. And we also decided let's put them in order of importance too, because I think sometimes we get caught up on the wrong, we're weighing things poorly, right? So we decided the number one most important thing is personality, right? Like, you could argue other things, but ultimately you want to be with somebody that you think their personality is amazing. Like, you think it's 9 out of 10 or higher, right? And they might be rich and they might be the hottest person in the world, but if their personality is not even bad, but it's just a 6 or 7, it's just okay, to me that's a deal breaker. To me that's a red flag.
Totally.
The second pillar would be like attraction, physical intimacy, physical chemistry, etc. And then third is spirituality, fourth is intellect, and fifth is sort of an all-encompassing emotional wellness, which is, vulnerability, your ability to emote, your ability to admit you're wrong, ambition, discipline, a lot of things could be thrown in there. And so the reason I love these is because I feel like almost any trait you could throw under personality, emotional wellness, spirituality, because some girls are like, well, for me, the most important thing is humor. And I'm like, throw it under personality, babe.
Right.
And yeah, for some people, it's funny. I've heard a lot of people say like the most important thing for them is loyalty. And I'm like, I think that's a horrible answer, because I think that's like implicit.
Amen. I
Like,
have thoughts on
I
that, but
think
yeah.
that's the lowest bar imaginable.
Yeah.
And sure, those people usually have dealt with infidelity or have dealt with a lack of loyalty, but I'm like, that's not a trait that you're like, I'm putting this above other things.
Right.
That should be your baseline. Like, of
Right.
course they should be loyal,
Right.
right? It's like saying I really want to date somebody that, you know, breathes oxygen. That's big for me.
Totally.
You
Totally.
know. And so, okay, and here's the funny thing. We decided these are the 5 pillars, but women have a 6th. Okay? So women, it's a man's ability to protect and provide,
Right.
right? Because we don't care if a woman can protect and provide. If she can, great.
Right. Right.
Right? Do you agree with these pillars? What are your thoughts?
I like them a lot. I had a question. So
Yeah.
one of the first things that came to my mind was, and that probably you're going to loop this into one of the 5,
Mhm.
and it might be just because they have these 5 that you naturally have this. But one
Right.
of the things, I have a couple of thoughts on both the trust and loyalty piece and then this other one. So I'll start with the trust and loyalty because it's not as big of a concept.
Yeah.
I think where people might feel like that's their number one is because they've been hurt,
Yeah.
right? So it all of a sudden becomes hurt. Because I never thought about that consciously.
Mhm.
Because to me, it was exactly what you said. It's complete, like that's a no brainer. It's
Mhm.
innate. I'm not going to be with anybody that I'd ever have to question that with,
Yeah.
right? And then when I was actually in a relationship where trust did become an issue and loyalty became an issue, I was like, oh, I can see why this is top of mind for people. So I agree with you that it should be innate and everything like that, but I can also understand why people might include it in there
Yeah.
just because they've been hurt in the past for whatever
Sure.
reason. But I still don't include that in there
Yeah.
in mine, right? Because I feel like it should still be innate. It's part of it's implicit, like you said.
Do you feel like looking back, you can say, you know what, there maybe were signs that there was going to be trust issues, or did it come out of
That's
left field?
it wasn't anything that in terms of how it ended, it wasn't anything egregious.
Mhm.
It wasn't anything major. It was signs that I saw from the beginning through to the end, and it became a pattern
Mhm.
of small little things, right?
Yeah.
Like not huge things. Like I could get in the details of what those were, but
Yeah.
we'll just keep it as is unless you want to dig into it. But just signs of 8 or 9 things throughout a year-long relationship that I'm like, that's becoming a pattern of a little bit of lack of trust,
Mhm.
where I'm not okay being with someone where I don't have those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So that's where that came. It wasn't that she cheated on me or anything
Yeah.
like that. It was this pattern, and then talking with an actual counselor later, she was like, to be honest, this is actually a certain behavior type, and it wasn't a matter of if she cheated, but when, which was kind of crazy. Because to be honest, she hid those really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, and who knows, that therapist or that relationship expert doesn't necessarily mean that she knew exactly what the future was going to be. But even without talking to her, I was able to catch enough where I was like, that's not okay for me.
Yeah.
Right. I want to be with someone where that's just not even a question.
Yeah. And it's also probably tied into just communication.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, you could, trust and communication or step siblings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So the other one I wanted to ask you about
Mm-hmm.
is whether it becomes a 6th pillar or 5's a better number, probably. So keep it. Wait, was it 6 or 5? What was it?
Men have 5, women have 6.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. Women always want a little extra.
Lots of thoughts on that one too. No, the one that I've realized, not consciously until it became a thing, right, was how important it is for me. And again, I can totally see how this could be looped into one of the 5, but how important it is for me to have respect and admiration for my person. Mm-hmm. So in other words, and I'm not talking about respect in the sense of like I respect you as a man should respect a woman. I'm talking about in the sense of I admire her for who she is.
Yeah.
Like she is such a good person, and I want to be more like her because she's so good. That to me is one of the I look for kindness, compassion, all those things, personality. So yours were personality, intellect, spirituality, attractiveness, and what was the 5th?
Emotional
well-being, right?
Communication.
Totally agree with that. Ones that, and that's probably personality. I'd add kindness, that kind of thing. And then admiration is just one of those that is kind of unique that a lot of people don't think about. But for me, I've realized, like, I want to be with someone that I just long for.
Yeah.
I heard somebody talking about their spouse, like, it's silly to mention movie stars, right? But one of the couples that I do love is, what's his name from The Office? Jim?
Oh yeah, John Krasinski.
John Krasinski,
Mhm.
and then
Olivia.
Emily Blunt?
Emily Blunt.
Emily Blunt,
Yeah.
right? Their relationship is just fun. Who
Mhm.
knows? We don't see behind the scenes,
Right,
but
right.
I love in a recent, acceptance speech, he's talking about his kids, and then he's talking about, he's like, I am so lucky because I get to literally spend every day and do this with the love of my life,
Mhm.
and we have things set up for our kids, and just even how he talked about her in terms of the love of his life. Like,
Yeah.
I want my person to be someone that I really love and
Yeah.
admire that
Yeah,
way.
totally.
If that
No,
makes sense.
I agree 1,000%. I think for me, it's almost like if those 5 pillars are all high enough,
That's what you're gonna
then all of a sudden there is adoration,
totally,
there is respect,
totally.
right?
Yep.
And another thing, and you could add a million things. I think the point of the pillars is to say, without these 5, I'm in a bad spot,
Yeah.
and even 4 out of 5 is not good enough.
Yep.
The problem is when you're dating, you're usually running into 2 and 3 out of 5s.
Yeah.
So when you meet a 4 out of 5, you're like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's still just it's not good enough.
Yeah.
But I think you have your 5 kind of basics, and then you decide for yourself, what are kind of my sub pillars? Do I need humor? Some people don't
Right.
really care as much. They're probably not funny,
Right.
but some people, they need, they want that in a relationship.
Totally.
Like, one thing for me I would add is playfulness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's something like Jordan Peterson
So
talks about
attractive.
a lot, the element of play in a
Yeah.
relationship. And to me, if I'm dating a girl and I feel like there's not a lot of playfulness, I just feel like it feels like a business relationship.
Yeah.
And even if there's like a really high level of attraction and like, like sexual energy almost, but without the playfulness outside of that, I'm kind of like, this is the person I want to hang out with the rest of my life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be silly and weird and funny, and I want to joke about everything.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not everyone's personality, but yeah, I need playfulness.
I couldn't agree more. And being kind of a wellness guy, there's more to it than that, right? Not just an attribute that you happen to like, but the reason that's important, how that impacts every other part of your relationship. Because if you have that playfulness, your mental health is probably going to be better, for example, right? Like, it's just going to impact so many other things. Like, I think of Navy SEALs or any guy or girl, special forces,
Yeah.
military. It's interesting because they have to be, and because in a relationship, you're going to go through such hard things. And if you don't have something that keeps it light like that, it's going to be hard to weather and be resilient to those things, because you're going to be more easy to break. That's why these Navy SEALs or any of these special forces guys have such serious jobs. Just like a marriage is a serious thing, you're going to go through really hard things. These guys go through crazy hard things.
Yeah.
But one of the big things that keeps them together is their sense of humor, their playfulness.
Yeah.
They play with each other like crazy, right? And they have to, almost, because of everything that they're going through.
Yeah.
And in a similar vein, a relationship would be similar, because you're going to go through so much. And if you don't have that playfulness side, I think that could really hinder a strong relationship.
Yeah, I agree. When do you feel like, for you, what are some signs that you're like really starting to fall for a girl? You're like, oh, this could be bad. This could be great, but this could be bad.
For me, it kind of goes in order, and I'll kind of share like one of the last people that I really fell for that way, and like how that happened, and that might help answer the question. So initially, and I'm a dude, so like attraction is a thing, obviously, right? So that starts it. You're incredibly physically attractive, and that's amazing. But then when you realize that there's depth there, right? So they have a layer of spirituality, like you mentioned, that being one of the pillars. And so, I'm attracted, but then they have this spirituality. And so, for example, it's happened with other people, in case there's anybody listening that's been in my life. Well, what about me? I'm just sharing one example.
Yeah.
But in this particular session,
we'll put in the show notes all the ones
by name.
Yeah.
But this particular, the epitome physically of what I would want. So I was already just like smitten that way.
Yeah.
But then she starts telling me about she served a mission for her church, and I was just like, okay, they're like, and then she was talking about it in such a a passionate way, and like opening up and like light coming out of her as she was talking about that. I was like, oh dang, so she's got the looks and she's got the spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I'm like, that's when I get in trouble.
Yeah, yeah,
That's when I'm like,
yeah.
oh shoot, because that's so hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to find even that little combination, let
Yeah.
alone all 5 of the pillars.
Yeah.
And but yeah, she really had those pillars. Intellectual, she was one of the smartest people I knew, right? She was I'm trying to think of these other pillars off the top of my head, but she really had all those things lined up, except for a couple, and that's why it didn't work. That's why it didn't work out,
Yeah.
right? The emotional piece. She didn't have a resilience and a strength with emotional wellness that she needed. She had so many other pieces, and that's why that ultimately, you know, after a year didn't go.
Yeah.
But that's what the reason I fell was those initial, the physical, the spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you really start to fall, do you feel like you start to act different? Like, what are some like telltale signs that Shawn is falling for a girl?
Man, these are good questions. I haven't thought about it like this. Well, here's another thing, because I was gonna say this with it as well, because other girls that I've found myself in a different way, because it's hard when you don't have that initial attraction. But I've been with girls who didn't have the attraction level that I'm used to. That's a terrible way of saying that, but like that I prefer, right? But man, I'm just seeing who they are, and when I just start like genuinely desiring to serve them. I remember telling somebody recently that I was with, I was like, you are my favorite person to do something for, because you're such a good person. Like, I just love doing stuff for you because of who you are. And that's, I think that would be part of it, if that answers.
Okay, this is a hard question. You like kind of touched on it. Do you feel like you've ever been able to truly overcome a lack of attraction for a girl? This is a brutal question. And please don't ask me it back.
Well, now we got to, because that's gonna make this really fun.
Yeah.
Well, this goes back a long time, but I would say there's one girl that I was with who I was not necessarily initially attracted to, but because of who she was in all those other areas, actually she became attractive to me. Like, and she definitely was not. And it's interesting because I have dated 10 out of 10s, a lot of them, like on the look scale. And I've just been blown away.
Congrats.
In that regard. No, but there's always something missing, right? It's
sure
that I should just be super real on this and get into the hot crazy matrix and everything else, but however you want to do that. But I've had that experience, but then also without some of these other things, without like emotional connection, like this is me just being real. I call it a sex emotional connection. So in other words, they could be the most attractive person on the planet, but if I'm not emotionally connected to them, or I don't admire or respect them, then it goes away. Like, I'm not attracted. And on the flip side, there have been people, to answer your question, I can only think of one, and she wasn't like unattractive.
Sure.
But she was definitely not in the same vein. And I guess ultimately, that was one of the reasons that I did end it. But we had a phenomenal relationship for years, actually. And it was because of who she was, how much I admired who she was. And that made her super attractive to me. Okay. So I was able to overcome that. And I think the only difference there is there was other variables that came into play that for the reason that relationship ended. But like, had there been no interruption, we probably would have just continued. And I probably would have married that person potentially and been incredibly happy. So yeah, I think I could have overcome that. Okay. But it's rare. They have to be firing like crazy on the rest of those.
That's why I have it so high. You know, I have it as the second pillar because I just think it's that important. And I think that doesn't mean you only chase 9s and 10s or whatever. It just means for whatever, you know, for you, whatever you feel like is like the level of attraction that you feel good about and you enjoy and it makes you feel excited, that's your threshold. You know,
it's interesting. I'll share two last thoughts on this, because one of the other things you've asked what I look for in someone, one of the other things is passion and drive, right? I'm just so attracted. So a lot of men are feel emasculated for whatever reason because of powerful women. I'm the opposite. I love powerful women. I am so attracted because to me that shows their drive and their passion. I don't care about the things that they have or what status they have, because they could be the most passionate teacher in the world and be making nothing, but I'm so attracted to that passion and drive and that desire to change the world for good and for better.
Yeah.
That's what I'm attracted to. Oftentimes that's come with looks. So the women that I've ended up with, it's come with looks.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, like a lot of times these powerful women are also attractive because they've known how to use that to get to their position as well.
Well, they're more confident.
And they're more confident.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
And so that's something I look for, but I did kind of feel a little prompting from God at one point, being because I had dated a lot of 10s and they weren't working out. And I remember seeing a girl in a certain situation and God kind of telling me like, hey, that is more of the girl that you should go for. And she wasn't a 10.
Yeah.
She's what I call girlfriend cute.
Yeah.
So not a supermodel, but she was super attractive enough. And then who she was made her that much more attractive. And I think that's what the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't go as extreme. I don't know if I'm older than you. And there's an old song called, and I don't remember what it's called, but if you want to be happy for the rest of your life, better make an ugly woman your wife. Okay. So I won't go that extreme.
Sure.
But I've definitely been in situations where if they're too attractive, it does cause problems too, right? Whether it's the trust thing because they don't know how to handle all the attention that they're getting. But I've also been with some of the most attractive in the world who are the most loyal in the world too. So that hasn't been an issue. It is a blend of all those 5 pillars. And that's why you can't have one of those out of whack.
Yeah. I will say this, and we can move on after this.
This is fun though. It's fun to talk about.
I will say, if you're a female and you're exceedingly beautiful, like just kind of across the board, like universally beautiful, not just some guys are into you, like you're just a smoke show. It doesn't come with, you don't go through that. You don't have that gift without being unscathed.
Totally.
Like it comes with, it's kind of a dark gift.
Can be.
You know?
Yeah, can be.
And I think, like, I always talk about there are lots of pros and lots of cons to getting married young and to getting married older, right? And I think for a really beautiful girl, it behooves her to get married young, you know, because, yeah, you start to get a really, really beautiful girl, honestly gets treated like a celebrity, like it would be the equivalent of like a B-list celebrity, male celebrity, you know? And yeah, how do you prepare for that psychologically?
It's a great point. And I have a very, very clear recent example of exactly that. I think this girl, I mean, sure, there's other stuff that affects our overall personality, whether it's childhood trauma or feeling like enough, but like in her particular situation, she is so beautiful that her life has not been a reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like and I don't want to say it here for protection purposes of keeping their name safe, because I gave some of the details, it'd be a little scary, but her life is just not, it's real for her, but it's just so, and unfortunately I think she got lost in that. Like, in other words, she's been given so much. I mean, people throwing cars, homes, rings, all these different things I mean, I'm talking about the most expensive things or hey, come sail around the world with me for a year and I'll take care of everything. Just come be with me.
Yeah. How do you say no to that?
Right. And so she's literally, I think, an incredible soul, like a very beautiful soul who's a very good person who, unfortunately, because she wasn't psychologically prepared for that, she got lost in that.
Yeah.
It's just like a young athlete who didn't know how to handle fame and didn't know how to prepare for that, not matter of looks, but just because of their status as an athlete. Same thing as a beautiful woman. If they're not come from a good family who psychologically prepared them to keep them humble or other things, that's why those problems exist.
Yeah. And like, I always say, like, if a very attractive woman is nice to a guy, just nice, there are very real consequences to that. And so the girls often learn that at a young age.
Yeah.
It's
not their fault.
So
many ways.
they have to build these walls because they're like, oh, if I'm just nice and friendly to my waiter, he's going to like stalk me now.
Right.
He's going to like try to get my number and try to ask me out and try to, follow me in my car. Like, so yeah, I'm very grateful to not be a hot woman. That's the
the takeaway here.
Yeah, that's the takeaway. That's the takeaway.
No, for real though, it's a thing, and yeah, in the same way I had the opportunity of being around some movie stars at some point, and their life not easy either because of just all that they have to be a certain way, and it's that same principle. So it makes sense. It just makes sense.
Yeah, and those, you know, people in those respective situations, it's hard to know, like, do people really like me for me, or is it just like my outward appearance or what I can do for them?
Yeah. And in a business setting, I've seen that happen all the time. Beautiful girl, guy comes in and says, "Hey, I just want to meet on this professional level." He always has these ulterior motives, and she never knows when she's sitting down for lunch, is this guy really interested in my intellect and what I offer professionally, or does he just want to take me out on a date or something else?
Hey, if a girl was cute enough, I'd take a meeting. I'm serious. Like, and I'm not saying I'd have like crazy ulterior motives, but if she's cute enough and is trying to sell me something, I'd be like, all right, let's chat.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But when they get solicited, like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this business idea," and she's thinking that, "Hey, I have all these smarts that I bring to the table, but this guy, I don't know if he really appreciates that or if he just appreciates my looks."
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Why would I be getting this deal or this business? Anyway, that could be frustrating.
Yeah, totally. What is for you a good definition of love?
That's heavy. That's deep.
Yeah.
It's like so much in that. There's obviously, I always think of the biblical answer of, you know, the highest form of love is charity, and we can dive into that a little bit more too. And I do agree with that because like that, I mean, the ultimate love in general, if we're talking about love more broadly and not just romantically, then that truly for me, the ultimate love does come from Christ without question. Like that is the ultimate example. It's what the kind of love that I would strive for in every situation, both platonic and romantic. So that's what love is to me, is Christ-like love.
And why is that, without like getting deep into like dogma, why is that a more like powerful love? Why is it a more sustaining or fulfilling love?
Because it truly is, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's truly altruistic in that sense. It's truly not about you. Like true Christ-like love in its pure form is purely loving that person without any expectation in return.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It's sort of love for the sake of love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true charity. It's true. Yeah. It's love for that's a good way of saying it. Love for the sake of love. And love is such a powerful thing. I was just talking to a colleague of mine today, and she was talking about the idea of higher love. And it's funny because I'm on the board of HXP, and they have one of these things that's on their wall. It says high love, high expectations. And actually, I always loved that. I think that's a thing. That's how they treat their employees. High love, high expectations. And actually, I've liked that. But she was kind of presenting this idea of high love, no expectations, which was interesting because...
Which is really unconditional love.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And she was saying, and hopefully this is okay, but in her specific situation with her spouse, when she did that and tries to show love in that way, that actually frees their spouse up to take accountability for their own stuff, and then to live on their highest level. Because if like it's truly, if this person is loving me without anything in return, then, well, maybe let me just get specific in their situation. So I think they were struggling in their relationship, and I think before she was probably of that mindset of high love, high expectation. So I'm going to give so much, but I need some in return.
Yeah.
But when she decided just focus on love, that freed that person up to take accountability for their own actions, to love freely, if that makes sense, and to live up. So in other words, if I'm loving without anything in return, and I'm seeing that somebody's doing that to me, that naturally makes me want to be so much better for them.
Yeah.
But if they're expecting me, then I feel like I'm performing, right? But if I'm free to, I want to love that person so much more. The same way that I was talking about with the girl that I was telling you about, when I knew that it meant something, was when I just wanted to serve her because of who she was, with nothing expected in return, but just because of who she was. That makes me want to she made me, by value of who she was, because of how she loved, want to love on a higher level.
Yeah.
So higher love is just like that idea of greatness begets, like, it's greatness, right? Like higher love begets higher love.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing that without that expectation, I think that frees them up to be at their highest level of love as
Yeah.
well.
I like the idea of like, if you're in a relationship, always considering like, how could we improve our love? Like, not just like work on our relationship, because that
Yeah.
feels like, I don't know, it just feels like trivial minutia sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's work on who's doing the laundry and who's taking out the trash and whatever. But it's like, no, let's work on our love,
Yeah.
and let's improve our love, and let's also take account and be like, where is our love,
Right.
and could it be higher?
Right.
Yeah.
Like thinking about, arguments or whatever. That's how I always thought that the idea of, you could be in an argument with your spouse or with your partner or whatever, but as long as, if you have that idea that the relationship is always more important,
Mm-hmm.
because I know I love this person, because we can be caught up in the minutia. So you
Yeah.
could talk about communication things. You can get into the minutia of that, which I think is important.
Sure.
I'm not to
Yeah.
take away from that. But the idea that on a higher level, our love is more important,
Mm-hmm.
and protecting that and knowing that it doesn't matter what this argument is, our relationship is more important. So let's go back to that as a basis, and then we figure out from there.
Yeah.
So I think you're right on that.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's possible to really love someone fully if you don't have very high self-love?
No. No.
Yeah.
Who was I just talking to about this? It was that same idea, and there's the cheesy version, but that it's real at the same time, meaning, the two great commandments: love the Lord thy God, and then love thy neighbor as thyself.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind that, when people pull out the as thyself part, is that you really can't, so as yourself, but how do you love your neighbor that way
Mm-hmm.
if you don't fully know how to love yourself?
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of that.
So, and I think that's so important. So I think, where people get confused is this idea of self-care then becoming a selfish thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? But one of my favorite,
Self-care and self-love are close, but they're not the same thing.
totally, and also, your intentions behind it, right? Like a high up leader in my church was giving a presentation to a bunch of MBA students,
Mm-hmm.
and they were asking him about all these things, and they were asking him, like, what's one of the biggest things that you learned, right? And he said, honestly, I've learned that when I and this should happen in highs and lows, but in his case, he was like, I know that when I'm in my most stressful situations. So for example, in his case, he was in grad school, wife, kids, in a PhD program, super demanding schedule,
Mm-hmm.
so demanding. He's like, that's when I knew it was most important for me to focus on myself and to take care of myself during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can only you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
Right. So that's that idea. So, and if you're doing it for the idea of like, I need to make sure that I'm taken care of and have this self-care and this self-love so that I can give more,
Yeah.
versus like, I'm just giving for me and not giving for other people. If you're doing it for the purpose of, I am going to fill my cup so I have more of my cup to give,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that principle.
Yeah. 100%. What is your, like, this would be like a tough question on a first date.
Love it.
What is your like absolute favorite thing about yourself?
That is a tough question for a first. Is this a first date?
I mean, it's not our second.
The thing that I love about myself, interestingly enough, it goes along with this topic of love.
Mm-hmm.
And I can dig into this in a million different ways, but the short version and why that's so powerful or so deep for me is I do feel like I have so much love to give.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been put on this earth to love and to help people feel love, and then therefore healing and everything else. So I would say my ability to love,
Wow,
if that makes sense.
that's beautiful. Yeah. How hard has it been to sort of to have all that love in your heart and sort of be perpetually single?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard for so many reasons. It's hard. in the sense of I have so much love to give that I want to be married with kids, and because I want to be able to give that love to these kids.
Yeah.
It's hard for those reasons. It's also hard in the sense that it's gotten me into trouble sometimes, meaning I have so much love to give, and sometimes that's come across as flirtatious or whatever it is, and where it wasn't meant to be kind of what you were talking about with an attractive woman, but where I'm being really nice and being very loving, and how that's taken the wrong way sometimes. So it's got me into trouble that way.
Yeah.
But answering more specifically the idea of being perpetually single, it's probably the hardest thing in my life.
Yeah.
For sure.
How do you make peace with it? Or are you at peace with it?
It is, for me personally, I mean, I know it might sound cheesy, but it truly is just my ultimate faith and belief in God, and that it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
And I talk about and I wrestle with him all the time on that. Like wow, sorry to get emotional on that, but like, I do have so much love to give, and I want to give that to a family more than anything. And if you were to ask me, like, if you were to ask me before I came to this earth, like, what's one challenge you don't want to have?
Right. Yeah.
This would be it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, Elder Maxwell talks about, what the crusty irony, or the, how do you say it? The crust on the bread of irony. Anyway, this idea of, we are given our specific challenges for a reason, to see how we'll deal with them. And I don't, I don't know why it is, but I it's just like somebody would have said, well, the one thing I wouldn't have wanted is cancer.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what they have, or whatever it is. It's easy for us to say that, but truly, for as long as I can remember, relationships and having a loving family has always been like the most important thing for me. And here I am, 45, not married, no family.
Yeah.
So much love inside of me to give. Like, God, no, that is the thing that it's the deepest desire of my heart.
Yeah.
To give that love to someone and to a family.
Yeah.
More particularly, like the whole thing, and not being able to do that. I feel like, part of me is, I just trust and believe that it's going to work out. Like, I really do. And, I've seen God work things out in my life in so many ways that, I sure as hell wouldn't have wanted to be at this age and not have that. And whether I know that sounds lame to say whether it happens in this lifetime or not, like, I believe that it will, but truly, even if it didn't, I'm going to be okay. He's hooked me up in so many ways that's how I come to peace with it. Like, I've seen him work so many miracles in my life that I know it's going to be full at some point.
Yeah.
Definitely not when I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But it will be full at some point.
Yeah.
And that's how I reconcile it.
I really appreciate you being vulnerable about it, because I'm younger than you, but I feel like I have the exact same answer to that question. It's something that consumes my mind at really all times. And it's this constant ebb and flow of how at peace am I with it, right? Because I agree. I do think you have to come to a point where your happiness isn't predicated on one thing, but when it feels like it's the one best thing in the whole world, and that's why we're here, like, it's hard to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrestle with that. And so, what's your advice for someone like me that's in a really similar spot, some years behind you, but I feel like as at peace as I am with it, it never leaves my mind. Right. And I want to live a life that is full in as many ways as I can. But it's hard when there's sort of a gaping hole in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have the answer for that. I will say the first thing that came to my mind, which is that experience I mentioned earlier when I took that dating break, because I was expecting a relationship to feel more whole than it needed to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes with my ultimate philosophy on a healthy relationship anyway, and I'm sure you're like this as well. And then I'll still get to the point that even if you're fully full, you still want that. So how do you not feel that void? How do you not feel that in some regard? But my advice is that, which is to fill your life and find value in other very important things like guy friendships. And we as men, it's so hard for us to connect, but when you are able to have really good guy friendships, it does wonders for you.
Yeah.
It's
I actually think it's easier for guys to connect than women.
really.
Uh-huh.
Tell me about
Yeah.
that. That's new for me.
Yeah. It's funny. I think we connect in such different ways,
Yeah.
right? I think women maybe more easily will like be friendly to another woman
Yeah.
at a restaurant
Yeah.
or something in passing. Um, but I think guys tend to be much more hobby driven,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
And so many of my friends I can trace back to started playing basketball
Yep.
together. We golf.
Yep.
We play pickleball.
Yep.
And sports is such an easy way to bond with a guy.
Yep.
You're spending 2 hours with him. You're joking around. You're being competitive, and you kind of get a vibe for their personality,
Yep.
right? And I think guys are more. They tend to be, at least in the beginning, they tend to be more straightforward.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like girls sometimes pretend to be friends in the beginning because that's just how they feel comfortable interacting when they first meet. And guys are kind of like, if that's not your kind of dude, like you're kind of just like, yeah, bro, you don't need to talk to me. Like,
well, I couldn't agree more on that idea, how we're hobby driven and that's how we connect. In fact, that's what the research and science says. In fact, Australia started this thing called, what they call man sheds, because that's how guys connect. There's so much science that goes, even then when you connect with the guy, a lot of times you'll be talking side to side, right? That's why a lot of times it's good to be doing some kind of hobby, whereas the women are totally great being right up in each other's business and being close that way. It's hard for guys. So there's more to that than we could talk about now. But in Australia, they have these man sheds because the idea was guys do connect so much. They recognize it's really important for health. We want to give men this opportunity. So they've created these man sheds, and where basically it's literally a tool shop and these men go work on things while they connect, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much to that, but I wanted to ask you those relationships, because I couldn't agree. Like in fact, the first time I ever felt anxiety in my life, the thing that took me out of that, one of the most key things that took me out of that, is I went and joined a basketball team with my buddies, and it like my mental health was a million times better all of a sudden. My question for you is, those connections that you have with your buddies playing basketball, how deep are those connections?
Yeah. It varies quite a bit, right? And you know, I have a lot of friends that's kind of it. We hoop, right? Like I play on a city league team that I've been on that team for like 13 years, right? And you know, the teammates have varied a little bit, and sometimes we get new guys, and sometimes guys get injured and go die and whatever. Not actually die, but they die in the sports world. But and some of those dudes, like, it's pretty much once a week, right?
Yeah.
And then some of them are like my guys.
Cool.
Right.
Cool.
And
you're fortunate.
But it's a mixture, because I have guys that I like play sports with, but I grew up with them. We went to high school together. We played on the basketball team together. We played tennis together. And then I have guys that like I golf with, but they're also like my best friends, and we just all like to golf.
Yeah.
And then, you know, sometimes I have dudes that I pretty much only see when I golf, you know? But for me, I'll just say this, because I believe that friendships can and should come in varying degrees. Like, I think it's fine to have friends that you rarely see, but when you do see, it's nothing but love. Right. And then I think it's important, if you can, to have really, really deep friendships.
And that's where you're super fortunate as a man. It's hard for men to have those deeper relationships. Yeah. But you've been fortunate to have that. Yeah. And that's why you're so healthy.
I think part of it is I start to shrivel up and die without depth in my life. And so I gravitate towards where there's depth. And so I think I can sniff it out, you know? And so there's guys that I love to death, and I would do anything for them. I think they're awesome. I think they're funny. I think they're talented. But because there's not a lot of depth there, we probably don't spend a ton of time together, right? I tend to just spend time with people that we can go sit in a hot tub and talk for 3 hours. Like that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Right.
On that note,
Uh-huh.
how do you find guys that you can connect with that way? Because this is something that I've struggled with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially bringing the spirituality piece into it. Unfortunately, and a lot of the guys that want to do the same things that I do, whether it's play basketball, play softball, play any sport really
Mm-hmm.
for me, and do those things, but also are like good quality people.
Yeah.
Because I only want to surround myself with super quality people that like lift me up, and I hopefully lift them up.
Yeah.
Right. Um, how are you finding those friendships that have that level of depth and quality, who are people who are not superficial, they are deep people, and they like the same things that you like, and they're actually good people, they don't do locker room talk, or they
Yeah.
don't talk about women in all those crappy
Mm-hmm.
ways, and like, because I want to go off on that in terms of so much of that toxic masculinity that exists. How do you find those gems of men,
Yeah.
and develop those relationships? How has that
Yeah.
worked for you?
I think it's a great question. I do think there's an element of, I don't want to say luck, but I think, yeah, my circumstances have put me around awesome people,
Cool.
right? And I can't take credit for that. But I do think I like to ask people abnormally invasive questions, um, because I'm not really interested in anything else.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
And so when I meet people, you know, if I kind of am liking their vibe and think they're funny or like a cool person, I don't really ask them where they're from or what they do for work.
Love that.
I don't really
Love
care.
that.
Like
Yeah.
um, I'll tell you a good example of a guy that became a close friend a couple of years ago, and we met playing spike ball. Um, and he was always a really chatty, fun guy. And after we were playing one night, a bunch of us went out and got some food, and he tagged along. And I was asking him how he was doing, and he's like, pretty brutal. I'm going through a divorce.
Mm.
And I was just like, okay, tell me everything, you know? And I was just like, dang, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, how recent is it? Like, what's going on? And I think a lot of times people feel like they don't want to intrude.
Yeah.
They don't want to like ask something that's none of their business. But I think when you ask earnestly, people usually want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's when you kind of ask almost as you're just bored, so you want to ask something like, have you ever been around somebody that's like, dude, tell me the hardest thing you've ever been through?
Yeah.
And you're like, bro, I don't know you. I don't know you like that.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I'm not throwing pearls before swine.
Right.
But, you know, sometimes somebody you barely know will be like, yeah, dude, why don't you like, I heard you got divorced. What was that like?
Yeah.
You know? And I don't know, there's something about asking in earnest
Yeah.
that feels different. And so with that dude, like we ended up talking in his car for like 2 hours, and he was tearing up and telling me things, and he was telling me about this therapist he started seeing, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well now this is somebody who I can actually be friends with.
Right.
And it just so happens we have the same hobbies. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of on the lookout for that characteristic, that depth.
That's great.
Right. So when I hear somebody, you know, going deep into something, I'm kind of like, ooh, what do we got here? You know, and obviously it's the same with females, but like I have found male friendship to be so important and just a lifeblood for me.
I think and hopefully you're okay with me saying this, and I think you might, and then unfortunately, I think all men need, and we'd all be better suited to be more like what you just described, like you. For whatever reason, a lot of men, and thankfully you don't, right? But a lot of men really struggle with that.
Yeah.
And they don't have, and
with what aspect of it?
Of being able to go deep like that,
Yeah.
and being able to be vulnerable and willing to do that. Because most men, and I don't want to blanket statement things, but like I think that's why part of the reason so many men are struggling, and we could dive into all the reasons of masculinity and everything else, but just even on the basic levels, Henry and Taryn Amar, and they talk about masculine and feminine energy, and we all have masculine and feminine energy. And I could be wrong. This isn't my area of specialty, but from what I understand or what I've been told, that kind is a little bit more of the feminine energy where you're able to do that, right?
Yeah.
You're obviously not a feminine guy,
Yeah.
but that feminine energy is there, and that's so important. And not as many guys have that, or at least they have it inside them somewhere, and they just don't know how to develop it because they've been taught other things, protective, like all this kind of stuff, and it's harder to be more vulnerable.
Yeah.
You are very fortunate that you have that ability. That's why you've been able to find those friendships. But I think if you were to ask the majority of men, they wouldn't be able to talk about it in the same way that you are. Whereas we all need it. We all want to go. Like that guy might have been the same way, but he really appreciated that you were able to go deep. But not very many men can do that like you do.
Yeah. What I've found also is a lot of guys, they actually really enjoy being vulnerable.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yes.
It's funny. They enjoy it, but it makes them a little uncomfortable. Right? Because it's just like anything, you kind of need to practice.
Yeah.
Like
that's it.
I have a buddy that he's, it's funny. He's become one of my closest friends, but he's like my best friend's sister's husband, but we're all close. I'm close with his sister. And so he kind of came into the friend group on accident, kind of married in, but he's just a homie. He's one of the guys, but he's like that. He gets a little prickly at times because he gets uncomfortable and he likes to kind of diffuse with jokes and kind of change the subject when it gets too heavy, but he ultimately likes going deep.
Yes.
And he's even said that. He's like, yeah, I'm not used to like, your friend group is way different than my friend group. he's like, but I like it, but I'm not used to it.
That's it.
And so I think if guys feel like it's uncomfortable or even that it's like a feminine trait, I think you just, you don't have to dive all the way in. You can just start asking people stuff, and that's when here's what happens. People give you little nuggets, right? And little crumbs. And if they feel like you're truly invested and truly interested, they give you a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so
that's a good point.
Yeah. I think, and you don't try to force it. Some guys I talk to and I'll ask them something and they'll just be like, oh, I don't know. And I'll be like, all right.
It's interesting. I started a men's group, and for that reason, because I do feel like it is a challenge for more men to connect. Not that they don't want to, like you said, and they don't enjoy it. They haven't developed that skill for whatever reason. And you could tell who in this group was just super uncomfortable being able to talk about this. And you're right, you can't force that kind of thing. It's got to be. But even coming together as a group of dudes who are willing to talk about things, some were all about it and so excited, and others were and the majority I would say are like very reserved and held back because they're not used to being vulnerable that way. They're not used to that. But like to your point, that's why I really like that. It's like anything, it does take practice.
Yeah, and I love the idea of, okay, if you want it to be this way, like, make that your culture, make that your friend group's culture, because there's been some guys that have kind of come into our friend group and it's similar as that other buddy. They're like, I'm not used to this. You guys are intense. You're just always talking about stuff.
Right.
But so in the beginning, they're a little quieter, a little more reserved. And then they start to realize, oh, you guys aren't busting each other's balls when somebody,
they're still okay.
When somebody shares something, and when somebody like is having a really hard time and is tearing up or somebody, nobody razzes them.
Right.
And so then all of a sudden it emboldens them and they feel like, well, maybe I can do the same thing. So I think you can change the culture in your little micro groups. It's not easy, but
I agree. And that's what I try to do too. But here's the next level question for you is so it's one thing to connect with men or anybody on deeper levels that way. And to your point, it takes practice, takes skill, takes, all that time. But then how are you finding people that have the same values that you have? So it's one thing to connect on a deep level, but for me to really connect on a deep level and to want to be around that person. I want to be around a person of light, right? Like I want to be around a person that has similar values that I have. not in any kind of judgy way, but just that I want to, that idea of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I want to be
Yeah.
around good people.
Yeah.
So how do you find people that you can connect deeply with on that level and then also have the same value system
Yeah.
that you have?
Yeah. I mean, that's an extra layer of complexity, right? Again, I think a lot of it I've been lucky and I've been blessed, but I think I've had to look in some unlikely places at times,
Mm.
and I've had to, and I love it now, but I guess when I was younger I didn't think about it a lot, but like a lot of my really close friends now are significantly younger than me,
Mm.
and so I've just been like, okay, as I get older,
Hmm.
like a lot of friends move on, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
friends get married and have kids, and you're not as close with anymore. So I've had sort of several iterations of building friend groups,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've realized it doesn't matter if they're a lot younger than me.
Yeah.
And I try to just, this is easier said than done. I don't know how often I do it well, but I think sometimes you go into a place and you tell yourself, none of these people are my kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're nice and they're great or whatever, but they're just, yeah, they're not my people, and
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. And I'll love them for what they are, but I probably not going to be really close with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to not have that
Not
mindset,
judge it that way.
but that's not my default setting.
Right.
I have to like kick against the pricks
Yeah.
for that one.
Yeah.
Like it's funny. This kid I met playing spike ball, he in a lot of ways is so unlike me and like not the kind of dude I would hang out with.
Uh-huh.
But we ended up like being roommates.
Mm.
Like we became really, really close. But he had some hobbies and stuff that in my past I might have kind of written him off
Yeah.
as like not part of my tribe.
Right.
Cool dude, whatever, but
Right.
we're not going to really click.
Yep.
But we did click on other things. And so I've tried to take out the trivialities,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think you have to do the same with dating relationships too, because when you're older and you've dated so much, it's so easy to be like, well, I can tell you very specifically and precisely what kind of girl I like.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the things she does, these are her hobbies, these are her looks. But I like the idea of saying, okay, I can have my preferences, my predilections, my patterns, the 3 Ps, but like I also want to give everybody a chance.
Right.
And like I also realized that passion is way more important than what they're passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
because ultimately I don't really care what you're passionate about. Turns out I used to think when I was younger, like I just want all of our interests and hobbies aligned.
I'll be the same. Yeah.
Because then it's just easier and we connect on all those things.
Right.
But it turns out I just connect off of passion.
Totally.
You know?
Totally. That diversity is important, I think. It's funny that you mentioned the age thing and then also talk about both male platonic relationships or even female platonic relationships and then
which I struggle with.
well, that's the thing, because it's an interesting insight that you have a lot of younger friends,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think you're right. Like we should probably make that more okay in some ways. And also, and it's not to say that there aren't people my age that I can be friends with, but the reality is most of my friends and the ones, because I was surrounded with a plethora of the best people on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
From college, from my mission to college to everything else. Like I was literally some of the best people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the highest caliber, super successful in life and family and all the things. And those were my people, and that's why I surrounded myself. And then they got married.
Yeah.
And we can still connect, but it's still different. Like we don't get to go hang out like we used to,
Yeah.
right? They got their families, and rightfully so,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
and some people, when they get married, die more than others.
Correct. And I know a lot of married people who would like die to have a friendship still, and they just didn't know how, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they just got married and that was their everything. A lot of guys, their spouse is like their only friend in some ways.
Yeah.
And guys would want more guy friendships and keep that, but it's just a natural evolution of life in some ways. Not saying that it's okay or not okay, or whichever way. But a lot of my friends have married, both the men and women. They've married off. And so how do I find people who are still of that caliber and all those things, right? Both in a dating sense and as well as just in a guy friendship sense. And to your point, like a lot of the guys that I'd want to hang out with truly are my married friends who I can't necessarily hang out with in the same way. And I try the best we can. And I have a couple of those friends who we do hang out like that. And it's everything for me. I freaking love it. I'm so grateful for it, but they're harder to find. It's hard to get that time because they have so much going on. Even my brother, right? Like he and I were so close, and now he's got his family and 4 kids, and it's hard for us to be able to connect in the same ways that we used to. So how do you find people who have the same kind of time and everything else, and you're right, I might have to go younger in that sense. And it's interesting to see how that applies to both dating and to guy friendships. But if I'm thinking of even just the guy friendships, a lot of the guys who I know and love and would want to be around in my circle, not to say that I don't have others that are my age as well, but they are younger. They're younger guys that have that energy, that have the desire to go play basketball or have those kinds of things. They're younger.
It's
even the spirituality. They're not old and mad and left to, whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you stay single, like for a lot of reasons, you stay youthful, or at least you can, if you don't give up on yourself. Because I think, the longer you're single, the longer you realize, well, if it's just me, I better be working on myself because this will get dark pretty quick, right? And so, I don't know. I feel like another thing that I've really tried to seek after in friendships are guys that really prioritize friendship, because
good point.
There are a lot of guys, like I said, that I love to death, and anytime I see them, it's amazing and we connect and I'm grateful for it. But I can tell that friendship is just not very high on their priority list. And that's fine. And some of them are married. Some of them I have single guy friends that I'm like, I don't know how this isn't a higher priority for me. All you do is like go to work and play COD, right? And I'm like, but for some people, it's just not, they don't need it as much as I need it, right? And so I've recognized, hey, I need it. Like, I need it like I need oxygen. And so I'm going to go find it.
Right.
And there are plenty of guys like that, but I also have to remember to not take it personal when someone doesn't prioritize as much as I do. And obviously maybe I have more bandwidth and maybe I'm more extroverted. And so, it's different for me, but like if I told you kind of all my closest friends, they all really prioritize friendship and make time to hang out, make time to go get dinner, make time to be in a bunch of group chats. And like, I know it's silly, but I think group chats are really important. I have a very strong testimony of group chats. And I'll stand by that.
That's funny. I want to hear that more maybe in another setting, because I'm the worst at group chats. Really? I'm so bad. Most of them are muted. I don't even look, please forgive me, but I don't even look at my family group chat.
Sure.
Because if it's not individual for me, it's just like, it must not be that important.
Sure.
But I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that's my personal flaw.
I just think it's real quick. I think it's a great way to stay tethered, especially with people that you don't see as often, people that live out of state. Because you're in frequent contact, it's easy to be like, hey, we should do this night. Like I have a group of friends that it's like my high school homies, and they're like, besides a couple, they're all married and spread out. And we're in this chat that's just going off all day long. And sometimes I ignore it. Sometimes I'm like, dude, I don't want to hear another thing about the vice president. But because it's kind of always going, we're like constantly talking about like, okay, well, what's our next like boys trip? And so it's easy to plan stuff. It's easy to initiate stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I wonder because honestly, and I'd love if you have any advice on this, and I mentioned this earlier, but the biggest thing that I've struggled with is finding men, and I mentioned this before about the values, right? Because even some of the best Christian men are still sharing locker room humor, and just personally, that's just not something I'm comfortable with, right? Like I don't like it. I don't jive with it. I don't any of those things, and so it's hard for me to find people that have those. So I personally struggle with trying to find good male friends, and I have a few, and I'm so grateful for them.
Yeah, yeah.
But most of the men, especially my age or even the young ones,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a few, like there's more in the young category because they're still strong
Yeah.
in their value system or
Right.
whatever. But a lot of them are just like it's just a different value system,
Uh-huh.
and I want to connect with somebody else. And so anyway, that's been my
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah, that's hard. I like to something I've done is like I said, I have kind of these different pockets,
Yeah,
but I try to not inorganically, but I try to bring them together when I can
yeah, I like that.
because I'm like these are both awesome awesome guys, similar values and stuff, and they're not friends, but like I'm friends with both of them, so I want them to be friends.
Right,
And then it's easier
that's a good
like
point.
I feel like 3 or 4 guys is sometimes an easier dynamic than just one on one,
Yeah.
you know? And so I like kind of forcing my friends into other sub friend groups.
Well, and I'm sure they're grateful for it,
Yeah.
right? Like in the sense of again, good people want to meet good people, so
Hmm.
that's never a problem in the sense of I don't think it's a problem to have more good people in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Totally. But yeah, I think it's also saying like, who cares if this dude is 22?
right,
If
yeah,
he's
normalize that
awesome
being
and
okay. Like right,
yeah, because I think it's easy to be like, dude, I don't have anything in common with this young guy, with this Gen Z guy, whatever. But
or vice versa. The 22-year-old's like, who's this old 45-year-old wanting to hang out with? Like, do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I can still
But
dunk on you, so it's all good.
right, yeah. You still don't want to see me in the paint. But yeah. And even like the opposite, like I have a couple random dudes in their 50s that I hang out with that I like go golfing
That's
with or
cool.
just go get lunch
Yeah,
with. And it's cool because they're in a different stage of life and I can get a lot of value out of that.
totally.
And if they're open to it, they should be able to get value out of it from me, And so I think sometimes the older generation has a tendency to think the younger generation are just idiots.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think increasingly they're smarter than us in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
just because the world's moving so fast.
Agreed.
Um, so yeah, I have a quote I want to read to you.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts. Um, I actually had a therapist that was on the show. She sent this to me and she's like, "You have to talk about this on your show."
Love it. Oh, it
So
goes deep.
it's by Sue Gaines, and she said, "Your best is what you can do without harming your physical or mental health, not what you can accomplish when you disregard it."
Hmm.
And I love that thought because it's like I think sometimes we get so down on ourselves because we feel like I didn't do my best.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
You know, man, I don't know if this is where you'd want to go with it, and I'm happy to go back in the direction that you want to take it. But what that spurred for me is, again, I come from a corporate like leadership development and wellness background, and working with all these founders or entrepreneurs or high level executives who have spent their whole life trying to to be the best,
Mm-hmm.
to be the best in their chosen career path, right? And that's completely come at the expense of their mental and their physical
Yeah,
health.
yeah.
And they've made all this money doing it only to be spending all their money trying to get their health back. You know what I'm
Interesting.
saying?
Yeah.
And for me, the real luxuries in life are those things that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Our relationships, our family, our health. That's not super expensive. You don't
Yeah.
have to go be amazing. And that to me is living truly your best. So I
Yeah.
100% agree with that quote in that sense, because it's funny because I've taken the last 2 years, I've left the corporate world and been focusing on building this other business. And when you're trying to build a business, a lot of times that's without income,
Mm-hmm.
and that's hard.
Yeah.
And definitely have not been financially at my best.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at one of the lower points financially in that sense. But I've been honestly, they've been some of the happiest years of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I have my health and I have been focusing more on relationships. I've been focusing on those real luxuries of life. And that to me is the best.
Yeah.
If I did anything that took the cost of that or took that away from me, that isn't the best. So I love that quote. I'll have you send that to me.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the idea of, I just think we're consistently way too hard on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're quick to give the people we love a lot of grace and a lot of forgiveness and room to fail. But with ourselves, we expect perfection.
Yeah.
And to me, that's where the toxicity comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, if you can't unconditionally love yourself, I think you're in a bad spot.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And the other thing is, I think it's important to remember that, what was my best yesterday might not be my best today, because I'm in a different mental state, and that's okay. Like, I think about what is my best when I'm freshly broken up with. It's pretty bad. Yeah. it's not very good, and that's okay. That's my current best.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go too far and like we talked about, affect my mental health.
Yeah.
Just to like say I did my best.
Yeah.
I
don't know how this exactly relates, and hopefully it's okay that I'm talking about Christian stuff as much as I am in scriptures and stuff. But I was working, and I got invited to this Bible group of these random people who I didn't know. And I go to this Bible group, and the lady who was leading the Bible group gave all these scriptures, and one of them was, I can't even remember the scripture right now. I'll have to find it, but something to the effect, and I'm going to butcher this, and maybe this gets taken off, but it's the idea of I love because of how much he loves me, type thing. And I think that's the same thing. Like, I think that self-love for me personally is not just me loving myself, but it's also because God loves me so much. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you feel like that's why? Because you said earlier you feel like you've always had so much love to give. Where does that come from?
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
And I felt this since as long as I can remember. Yeah. Like since second grade, like I had this experience, and I saw this kid who was struggling and was crying in front of the class, and I was just like, I just want to go like take care of this kid, and I just had so much love to give him. And then also, like, as an adult, I went through a divorce, and I went through a really, really hard time. And to answer that question more specifically, like, I went through such a hard and dark time, but Christ and God was there for me in the most beautiful, loving way. And then when I was able to come through that, I had so much love that I was literally bursting with all this love to give, because I felt how much he loved me.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, that self-love, we can love ourselves so much because God loves us, if that makes sense. That's just my personal take on it.
It's like you've been given all this light, and you can't help but spread it.
Yeah.
And you can't help but sort of emanate that light.
Yeah, 100%. And so 100% on that. And then also, if someone's so magnificent and divine as Jesus loves me that way, like, there's two aspects of it. One, it makes me want to love myself more, because if he can love me, I can love me. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then on top of that, like, which is what you were just saying a second ago, and the same thing when I was a missionary for my church, I literally felt like I had God's love inside of me for these people.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to love so much more.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Having gone through some really bad heartaches yourself, how do you get through those? like listen, we all go through them in varying ways, and there are some people that are lucky and meet somebody young and get married and don't really ever deal with heartbreak, at least romantic heartbreak. But for yourself, as you've had different iterations of love throughout the years and have maybe had your heart broken multiple times, which I'm just going to assume you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
How have you learned to deal with that pain? Because that's a really specific pain that feels unlike anything else.
Yeah. And again, I hope this is okay, but for me, there's two answers that I'll give to that. But first and foremost, it's God, without question. There have been times, and that's when I really learned to rely on him, because divorce being one of those in particular, there's just been very specific times where I knew very clearly that I didn't have what was necessary to be able to overcome that by myself.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have God, there's no way I could have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just genuinely for me how that's worked. God has been 100% there. Also, like I was saying before, in my opinion, that's the only true source of full healing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only way you can be okay in that situation. Truly, like
Yeah.
that is my knowledge and
Yeah.
experience of that. That is the only way you can actually find full healing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fascinating about that, now I combine that with my second answer, which is that idea of those 8 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to have the resilience to go through those hard things, like as I've noticed, like these last 2 years, I've said they've been the happiest. They've also been 2 of the crazy hardest
Yeah.
of my life.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't getting good sleep, if I wasn't getting good exercise, if I wasn't adding nutrition to my body in the right way, if I wasn't having a spiritual grounding, if I wasn't doing some kind of stress regulation, if I wasn't having good, strong social connections, all those 8 pillars, that's why, in my opinion, those 8 pillars are not just absolutely critical for performance, but absolutely for resilience.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could nerd out on this stuff like crazy because I'm literally in the process of studying these teams, these college and professional teams,
Mm-hmm.
and how they have had resilience. And it's those things. I'm working with a neuroscientist at Columbia who her thing is, in order for a team of employees, in this particular case, same thing in sports, to be able to perform at their best level and also to weather the hard times, they have to have trust and connection.
Mm-hmm.
So that idea of social connection, for them to be able to truly be resilient.
Yeah.
And then to have performance. So in other words, those 8 pillars are what it is for me. So
Yeah.
those are the answers, and God is one of those 8 pillars. So that's how I would put that in there. But that's how you get through the hard times.
Yeah.
And like when anything hits, like you weather that like a champ.
Yeah.
Like things that would have knocked you off, and they'll still be like, it's like taking a blow, but because you're so strong,
Yeah.
you can handle it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've gotten to a point where you're like, you know what, dude? Like, I can weather any heartbreak because my heart's been broken so many times and in so many places that some resilience has been built up.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that?
Ultimately, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt like
Sure.
crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't feel it.
Yeah.
It absolutely will knock you off your feet sometimes. But ultimately, yeah, I don't think that there's, and knock on wood, right?
Sure.
Like I don't want to, but again, because God's one of my 8 pillars, that's why I feel like I can say that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's plenty of things that by myself would knock me off my feet 100%, but with him there, like anything, like truly nothing's impossible. I can weather and handle anything for sure.
Yeah. And I feel like you can get to a point where you're like, you know what? It's fine if I get knocked off my feet. I just got to figure a way to get up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And I do feel that. I feel like I've been through enough of hard things. Like it's always going to work out.
Yeah.
Like that's and I know I don't say that boastfully or bring on the hard things. It's not like I want them.
Yeah.
Or I'm being prideful about that in any way.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had enough experiences where I have been just completely knocked off my feet, and I know that it always comes out and it works out. Like that experience, that knowledge is enough for me to know that it's going to be okay, no matter how much it hurts right now.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think when you go through a lot of hard stuff, you go one of 2 ways. You know, you either become weaker and more prone to quitting and more prone to bitterness and resentment, or you become more resilient and you become even. This is maybe a hot take, but I think you even learn to love more.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
As long as you address it the right way, right? Because other people can become more bitter. But if you do approach it in that healthy way, in the way that we're talking about, not that either of us would be perfect at it by any means, but if you absolutely learn to love more.
Yeah. I do think my capacity to love is much higher than when I was 21.
Absolutely.
25.
Because of going through hard things.
Yeah.
100% agree. By a long shot.
And my empathy scores are through the roof.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay, one more quote for you.
Okay.
This is not really related to anything we were just talking about. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. It's by Lauren Eden, and she says, "When you are not fed love on a silver spoon, you learn to lick it off knives."
Okay. What's your take on that one?
It's kind of like, if you haven't been given love in your life in a really healthy way, you'll take it in an unhealthy way.
Oh, interesting.
You'll take it any way you can.
Interesting.
And so when you have parents or friends or family, the people you've been surrounded by that have been really warm with you and really soft with you and given you grace and have allowed you to be vulnerable and have made love easy for you.
Yeah.
They've made the relationship easy. When you have that, it's easy to give it back in that same way. And it's easy to spot and say, well, that's bad love. That's not good love over there.
Yeah.
But when you haven't received it in that way, and it's always been with conditions, and it's always had strings attached, and it's come with baggage, then you'll take the bad love.
Yeah. It's interesting. My take on that was totally different, but I couldn't agree more with what you just said.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on, and it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways because everybody's situation is different. Like someone who's fortunate enough to come from a family that has all of that, I mean, what a freaking blessing. And I do think that they have a leg up, honestly, for those reasons. And to people who don't, it doesn't mean that they can't be successful, because I am an eternal optimist. I think that we can all figure it out, and we can learn even from our limited and social environments or whatever it is. But it's hard. It's like I've struggled with that. Like my family, I won't get into it super deep right here for maybe time's sake, but like it's interesting. It has its pros and cons, but I will say on the romantic side of things, I didn't learn good love, and not to say that I don't think that I can figure that out, right? And same thing in a lot of other aspects. And I feel like I don't feel, there's moments in my life where I want to be angry and be like, man, like I got the short end of the stick and I didn't learn, but I'm blessed in so many other ways. And in fact, in my family, like I love it because so many other families struggle. In my family, there might be plenty of crazy, but there's so much freaking love in the family, like between siblings and between like that. I'm so grateful for.
Yeah.
So we've learned to love each other with our differences and all that kind of stuff. And I am so incredibly grateful for that. And that's been phenomenal. When it comes to romantic love, I did not learn. So I learned love in the most parental loving way. I learned love in between siblings. Like we hug, we say love each other, like probably make people uncomfortable how much we say it. And that's not with every single member of my family. I would love to be closer with others than I'm, right? But that's how I love being with my family. So I'm really grateful for that. But I didn't learn the romantic love, and I do feel like shorted. And in working with therapists or with relationship experts, I've seen them talk about, and I've been trying to learn this my whole life, what are the things that I'm just used to? So I am just taking it in a form that's not necessarily healthy. And how can I get that insight of being more, having it delivered to me on a silver spoon, so that I can contrast the love that I might be accepting with that. Do you know what I mean? How do you get that when you haven't had that blessing of coming up from that kind of background? So anyway, I would love to dig into that more. I also took in a little bit of a different twist.
Yeah.
And again, I think what you said is absolutely true. And then on top of that, this different of a twist is the way that I took it is, even when it's been really, really hard to find love, the fact that you found it in the most difficult of places makes that love really special and unique, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And if it's not the unhealthy kind that you're talking about, right? But learning to love in the hardest of environments, just like I can't imagine, again, what Christ must have gone through when he's not even accepted by his own people and still loving them, right? And that level, that depth of that love, I mean, that's off the charts.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions. We'll wrap right up. Okay, you got divorced, what, 8 years ago? You said something like that.
8 or 9, yeah.
After all the work you do with wellness, I'm sure you feel like you've evolved a lot over the years. What would you go and tell yourself fresh out of that when you're maybe at your lowest?
Hmm. Um, I mean, just what I've been saying this whole time, which is truly to focus on filling your lives in those 8 areas, and that'll quicken your healing
Yeah.
for sure, right? Um, and that's an easy answer. I could probably think about that more deeply, but that's the answer. Is just um, if I were to think about in terms of how hard that is and what that looks like. I mean, yeah, that really is the easy and the deep answer,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I literally, when I went through a divorce, I got shingles because my body was responding to the stress. I
Yeah.
was like, even though it was a good, like, I'm on great terms with my ex-spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was very mutually loving how we
Yeah.
did it. We don't hate each other. It was about as love. I mean, people are shocked
Mm-hmm.
at that relationship. It was a very loving thing, but still the stress of going through
Mm-hmm.
that. And yeah, I would tell myself to go focus on just being healthy in all
Yeah.
these areas, and that would help my healing a lot
Yeah.
quicker,
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I like this question because I think sometimes it's almost like you know, you have some 2020 hindsight, right? But it's still you. So
Yeah.
it's almost like I can apply that same advice for me at any point,
Totally.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
um, okay, my last thing is just I like to turn the mic around and see if you have any last questions for me.
I've asked you a
I
lot
know
because
you
I'm
have, yeah.
so curious about those. Um, and again, I love when you were talking about how easy it is for you to form relationships and how you think it's easier for men's relationships. I want to ask you, I do want to turn the mic around for you at this stage when you and I both talked about we want to be married, we want to have a family, we
Mm-hmm.
have so much love inside of us to be able to give to those people that we hope to have in our lives. If you were to turn and talk to yourself and give yourself advice on what you should be doing at this time,
Mm-hmm.
would you tell yourself to focus so much on the relationship? Would you tell yourself to focus on other things? Like, what in general, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, like just my current self.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's a good question because I'm always trying to you know, tell myself the right thing. you know, um, that's what I'm currently battling with every day. I think,
The reason I ask it that way is because it's much easier sometimes for us to give advice to other people.
yeah,
Yeah, so maybe I should say it like that. What would you tell me?
yeah,
Because then that would be like the best advice for yourself.
right,
Do you know what
right,
I mean?
yeah, um, yeah. I think the best thing you or I could do, well, I'll just say, is to try to add light into your own life. And I think often the best way to do that is to add light into other people's life,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I think if you're doing that, all you're doing is setting yourself up to be a much better husband in the future, a
Exactly.
much better father.
Totally.
And so I'm like, okay, it's actually, in a way, it's a blessing that I haven't gotten married, haven't had kids yet, because I've been given so much time to prep.
Yeah, I totally agree with
I've
that.
been given so much time to fine tune how I want to do things, how I want to approach things,
Yeah.
to see the pitfalls of other people, to see what's really important to me. And so it's this weird paradox where, like you said, I felt like I was just listening to myself talk in a voice memo. I feel like this has been the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, and has been like my life's trial, even if that sounds really trivial to
Mm-hmm.
some people. Um, but it might be my biggest gift.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when I'm in self pity mode, which I like to go hang out there sometimes
Yep.
at Club Pity,
Yep.
um, I can't think that way because I'm in self pity mode. But when my head is clear and I'm thinking straight, I have to realize that this maybe is one of my biggest gifts,
Yeah.
and has enabled me to do things that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And I think to look at it as anything other than a gift would be a mistake.
I love that. I love that.
And it's
hard.
Listen,
It's so hard.
It's hard
when you don't have that and you feel that lack and you're like, is it ever going to happen? And how is that a gift when you know what I mean? But yeah, I love that.
And it feels like there's no middle ground, because it feels like I either feel like it's a curse and the worst thing that's ever happened to me, or like I said, when I'm clear-minded and introspective, I actually do think it's an incredible gift.
Love that.
But just like any spiritual thing you experience, you forget pretty quickly, and you have to remind yourself.
Yeah.
And because I've had moments of such unbelievable clarity from on high that I'll be okay, and that I'll get the things I want, and that it'll actually be even better than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, I'll forget it daily.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've had that.
I'm glad that you've at least had that clarity, because I even struggle with that sometimes. Even as eternal, I'm generally an eternal optimist. But I don't know that I've had that clarity necessarily.
Yeah.
I just trust that it's gonna happen, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's the way it's hard to forget.
Let me ask you this, and this is getting so personal and spiritual, and so if you've tuned out already, don't, and come back. This is where it gets good. Have you? Because I would say I've only had this clarity in the last year or two.
Cool.
And I would say it's taken for me really, really, like literally crying out to the Lord and not asking for anything specific, but just letting him know what's on my heart and waiting for an answer.
Yeah.
And I guess my question would be, have you, you've talked about wrestling with God and wrestling with your faith and wrestling with maybe hope. But yeah, have you really like cried out in your darkest moment and just kind of stayed on your knees until you felt something?
Yeah. It is a beautiful thought and question, by the way. I have, and it has, and that's why I have the hope that I do, and that's why while I don't think that I've had this clear vision of what it's going to be, ultimately, I still have the hope for that, if that makes sense. Because of, in those moments when I have been heart-wrenchingly, gut-wrenchingly on my knees, pouring my whole soul, just being like, and I love how you said that, just not actually, I was just talking with God and just telling him about the situation, your loves, your desires, your wants, your frustrations, your all those things, and just literally going all in. Every single time he's given me something. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah. It hasn't been the full picture. Right. I would love to put the full picture of someone.
To be clear, mine is not either.
Okay.
In any capacity.
Okay.
I've just felt such a, maybe clarity was the wrong word, but I felt such a confirmation, such a metaphorical hand on my shoulder.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's all I need.
Yep.
It's kind of like I just need just a little bit of hope, and I can move forward. And so, yeah, that's my advice for myself and for you, is to just hold on to hope. And it sounds, I hate when I say something that sounds really, really trite and cliche.
Yeah.
But the truth is, like, sometimes it's just true.
Yeah.
Truth is truth. But I had a friend of mine come on the podcast one time, and I asked her to, like, as a loving friend, to just give me some piece of advice, right? And she said, I want you to hold on to hope, even if it's just for tonight. Like, just focus on tonight, and I really love that, because it's almost like a principle of recovery, one day at a time. And I love that, because sometimes it feels like, well, can I have hope for however much longer? Like, it sounds daunting, and it's like, you know, if you had told me at 21, I need to hold on to hope for another
16 years.
however long, then I would be like, I don't think I can make it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I can hold on till the end of tonight.
So well said.
You know? But Shawn, thanks so much for coming on, dude.
Thanks for having me.
It's been really an act of catharsis over here. You know? I appreciate your insight, and it feels like you're somebody that I honestly like can take a lot of things you said and apply them to my life. And you're somebody that maybe it sounds like I'm pandering, but you're somebody that I look up to.
I appreciate that.
And it's cool to hear a little bit about your journey.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been, obviously we didn't know each other before, but man, it's cool because I'm like, oh man, they are out there, the good guys that you like have the values that you would want to hang out with, right? Yeah. They're out there, and that's you for me, and I appreciate that. Also, like, you've given me a couple awesome nuggets. Like, I'm gonna go back and listen to some of the things that you said in this, especially that idea of taking this experience that we're both in right now as a gift and looking at it that way.
Yeah.
That kind of turned some things on their head for me. So thank you.
Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, man. All right.